Okay, let's go ahead and get started. It is really nice to see so many friends and familiar faces. Not only do we have faculty and students from the college, but we've got leaders from our business, government, and nonprofit sector. So I want to just thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be part of this year's Executive Ethics Symposium. And I think we've got a topic that is really timely. We're going to be talking about benefit corporations, and if you're, as a group, any indication of what I've experienced, it's a very new concept, but it's gaining momentum, it's gaining traction, and I think after today's Executive Ethics Symposium, you're going to leave with a much better understanding of where this has come from and where it's going. So on behalf of the Center for Leadership Ethics in the Eller College of Management here at the beautiful Lodge on the Desert, I'd like to welcome you to this year's symposium. My name is Paul Melendez, and I have the real pleasure of serving as a faculty in the Department of Management and Organizations, a department that is among publics ranked 9th, and I still get a grin every time I say that. But we're doing some really wonderful things in the college and in the department. Among not just teaching courses, I'm also the real proud founder of our Center for Leadership Ethics. And for those of you who are familiar with the work that we've been doing, while the center may be new, we've been at this work for over 10 years. And we're driving value by really focusing on 3 areas: the research our faculty do, the educational courses that we develop for our students, and also some of the more innovative programs, outreach programs that we execute. We have a real knack for connecting some of the research discoveries of our faculty with business and industry, and that's been very well received. When you look at some of the courses that we have taught, just a few years ago we had a course in business ethics. Now we have a whole litany of courses that involve business ethics, law, and of course corporate social responsibility. And from the outreach standpoint, some of the more innovative programs that focus on the K through 12 collegiate, and as with today's program, our symposium, the executive level. So we're doing some really, really wonderful stuff. And our center is the first of its kind, not only in the college, but in the university. And you're all part of that as being friends to the college and the center. Now, as you can imagine, these programs don't happen without a lot of support. So I'd like to kind of formally recognize some of our sponsors and supporters. First, I'd like to recognize Merchants Information Solutions. So if I could have both the CEO and Vice President, both Russ Johnson and Jim Collins, please stand. I want to thank you very much for your corporate sponsorship. Merchants is really kind of a world leader in identity theft and background screening. Very innovative, and we're just delighted to have you as partners. Also, one of our corporate partners is Ethics Point, a company that's based out of Portland, Oregon. And while the CEO and the chairman aren't here, they are here with us in spirit. And they're also in a very unique space, in that governance, risk, and compliance space, also very innovative, and also one of our corporate sponsors that make today possible. Also want to recognize our friends with Net Impact. For those of you who aren't familiar with Net Impact, it's an MBA association that's national. And these are students that are very interested in everything from sustainability to corporate responsibility. And I'd like to thank Dave Marty. Dave, if you wouldn't mind standing, one of the representatives with Net Impact. Thank you for your support as well, Dave. And I also want to recognize Miss Ann Pentland. Where's Ann? Ann is our program coordinator, and she is responsible for this program just going off flawlessly. So Ann, thank you for all your hard work and coordination on this program. Last but not least, I want to also recognize my department head and the executive director for the Center for Leadership Ethics, Dr. Stephen Gillen. Stephen is not only my boss, he's a very dear friend, and I want to thank you for really offering that intellectual support, and quite frankly, for giving me a very, very, very long leash to go out and run and to do wonderful things like this. So with that, I'd like to have Stephen come up and say a few words. Stephen?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Glad to have you here. I tell you, this is a special treat for me. About 10 years ago now, I started teaching a class in the Eller College on social entrepreneurship. The dean asked me to do it. It sounded interesting. I had no idea what it was, and I said, yeah, I'll do it. The more I investigated what is social entrepreneurship, the more I got excited about this idea of using business principles to address societal environmental problems. At the time, there were no textbooks. There were very few readings in the area. There were some case studies of microloan programs and so on, but it was really a field in its infancy. And so to see 10 years later just how far this field's grown, and to see actual structures like B Corps that are being recognized and developed not just in this country but throughout the world is really gratifying to me to see this concept has taken off, that you can merge business and social impact. So I think this is going to be a wonderful day. I also just want to say that this event and events like this are part of what we're trying to do more and more of in the Eller College in terms of reaching out to the community. You know, we do a wonderful job with our students, but we feel we've got something that we can share with the community. So just one other set of hats that Paul and I both wear is heading up the executive education for the Eller College. And so we've been working with a number of you in this room to put on non-degree executive courses, whether these be leadership courses, negotiation, finance for non-financial manager type of things. Always looking to partner with you on those types of initiatives. So any interest in that, be sure to contact Paul or I. Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for coming.
Very good. Thanks, Steve. Okay, so just a couple more things for me, and then I'm going to gracefully kind of move aside and let our panel here take the podium. A little bit on why B Corps. A couple of years ago, and we do these executive ethics symposiums every 2 years. For those of you that were present a couple years ago, we tackled the difficult issue of what should homeowners do when they're underwater? Should they exercise a strategic default? It was a very interesting, intense afternoon. I think we all left there as if we had sat in a sauna for a good couple of hours. But again, I think we left with a much better appreciation and understanding of the complexities involved in that decision. This year it's a lot more lighthearted, I think, and I think this is good. I think it's well received. I learned about B Corps a number of years ago, and I've shared this with our panel and with a number of you. How many of you remember Ben & Jerry's? They're still around. Very good product. Also very much a poster child, if you will, for corporate social responsibility. When you think of their sustainability efforts, when you think of their philanthropic giving, when you think about how they deal with their employees in very innovative, creative ways. Well, they were bought out. Some would argue in a hostile takeover by Unilever, the French or the Anglo-Dutch company. And, you know, this really kind of put a shot across the bow of a lot of people who are social entrepreneurs and interested in sustainability and CSR. Because the question was, in a big acquisition like this, would a company like Unilever maintain those CSR programs and principles? And so there's a lot of debate even today as to whether or not, you know, the owners really had to sell the company. And I think that may come up here later today. But when I think back in time, that is the point when I became very aware of B Corps. And just so you know, B Corps are one of a number of different hybrid organizations, right? There's the, what is it, the S, or the, you have the limited profit, limited liability type of hybrid organization. So there are a number of these that are beginning to take root. So it seemed appropriate to go ahead and talk about B Corps today. When I thought a little bit about who I should put together as a panel, I had to start with B Lab. And B Lab is just a very interesting nonprofit. I've got Andy Fife, who's going to be taking the podium here shortly. He's going to give you a little bit of history on the evolution of B Corps, some of the opportunities and obstacles that the movement may encounter, and really, I think, kind of help make some important distinctions from a terminology standpoint between B Corps and being B certified and some other important distinctions. So we're going to get it right from the source, and Andy flew out from San Francisco to be with us here today, so I want to thank you in advance for doing that.
Thank you, Ed.
Absolutely. We also have Adam Goodman, who's the president and CEO of Goodman's Interiors, and just an excellent company, and recently made the decision to get B certified. I think it's going to be very intriguing to hear his rationale for why they decided to do this. What's the perceived competitive advantage? What do you see out there in the marketplace? You know, do you think that other companies will follow suit? And then, of course, I had to bring in our professor, one of our professors from the Rogers College of Law, Professor Bill Sjostrom. Bill is an expert in corporate law and a number of other areas, and he's going to help try to shed some legal light on these new legal entities that we call B Corps. So with this panel, I feel very comfortable that we're in for a wonderful afternoon. What I'm going to do is start with Andy, then I'm going to have Adam, then I'm going to have Bill take the podium. What I love is for you to hold your questions so that at the very end, we'll take a quick intermission, come back, and then do our Q&A session, and then get everybody on to their weekend. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and ask Andy to take the podium, and I'll get you the clicker. It's all yours, Andy.
Sounds great. Thank you, everybody. It is a little hotter down here than San Francisco. But I did hear that it's not as hot as usual, so maybe I brought down a little bit of coolness. But getting off the plane in 90% humidity was a reason to take off your sport coat. So this is just kind of the kickoff. We do see it as building a new sector of the economy. So you will see a lot of kind of trendy infographics, especially if you picked up our annual report from the front. We're going to just get into kind of the landscape of why we exist, why we saw a need from the beginning. And so we're really looking at these three kind of pillars of what we're seeing in our economy. One's the consumers, the other is obviously the entrepreneurs, and then the third being the investors. We are seeing this transition towards a little bit more alternative thinking. So from the consumers, we really want to support better brands, companies that are really creating societal, environmental impact, positive impact. But for a lot of us, it's very hard for us to trust what those brands are saying. So even though there's been studies done that look at 70% of consumers want to choose better companies, even higher percentage of consumers are not trusting what these companies are saying. On the second front, investors want to put their money into more socially responsible investments called impact investments. Yes, we're seeing this as kind of a drop in the bucket, $3 trillion out of the total of 30. But we are seeing this is more of sustained growth, not looking for the immediate return on high return, but looking at sustained return on positive impact through where you're putting your money. On the third is the entrepreneurs. So we are seeing a huge growth of entrepreneurs going through incubators, through co-working spaces, starting companies. But the difficult part is them being fearful of scaling and really making sure that the values of their company are going to last no matter how their business scales. So a perfect example of Ben & Jerry's, one of many. Ben & Jerry's has kind of been the poster child of why this exists. And I was actually talking to Chris in the back. A little bit of background about B-Lab is the founders of B-Lab were actually the founders of And One basketball company, which comes to a lot of surprise to a lot of folks. What a lot of people didn't know was that And One did a lot of benefits to their employees, gave back to the local communities, did a lot of volunteerism, and then they grew to be a $250 million company. And when that happened, they sold, and a lot of those values got thrown out the window. And so the founders, J. Cohen Gilbert and Bart Houlihan, walked away and started talking to the folks like Ben Cohen and said, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? So that entrepreneurs who are really creating businesses and doing a lot of kind of dual initiatives of taking care of their employees or giving back or having partners like 1% for the planet, that doesn't change when outside investment comes in or through succession. So if we kind of focus on these three pillars, this is what B-Lab focuses on. And I'll get to how we're addressing these three needs: the consumers, investors, and entrepreneurs being protected for being mission aligned. And so if we look at the current system, yes, corporate law makes it very difficult for these entrepreneurs to be very values aligned. On the second front, there's really no standards that exist to really prove that the stories that these brands and these marketing departments are telling us as consumers is true. So in the past, we've seen shareholder capitalism. This is really making sure that you're getting the quarterly return on your shareholders, and then when the board gets together, that's the main element of the conversation that's being posed. Now we're moving a little bit towards stakeholder capitalism, so that the companies can really marry, the values of their business with those of society and of the environment, looking at those who are directly impacted by your business, the environment, the local community, your employees, but then also your shareholders as well. And I promise this will get more exciting pretty soon, but this is just a little bit more of why this exists. And it's not always fun to hear about standards and corporate law and impact investing, but we'll get to some exciting stuff. And what we're seeing is that these companies that are focusing a lot on stakeholders are really having these types of fruit, not looking at externalities of saying, well, the oil going down river and affecting other communities is not really our problem. These are companies that are really making that their problem and addressing those needs and knowing that really the negative effects of their company are things that they can control. And so recently there was the Inc. 5000 list, and about 27 B Corps made that list. And that doesn't look at societal environmental impact. That looks at revenue growth and the number of jobs these companies are creating. And one great thing that we've been able to see is that through this difficult economic time, where these companies are actually showing that they're succeeding. They're really creating a lot of jobs, they're retaining jobs, and they're really giving back to local communities. So it's kind of a Disneyland of housekeeping seals. There's a lot of certifications out there, and a lot of people. I have friends at Fair Trade and some at USDA, and until you kind of sit down and have a dinner conversation with them, they think of it as just another stamp that's kind of competing in the space. But what we've seen is that a lot of these certifications are either for your product, for your facility, for your labor relations, and those are all different elements of the assessment that we pose for companies. But what we're doing is we're creating standards for the entire company, looking at your operations as a whole, not just on the product level, not just on the facility level, but when you're walking down Whole Foods aisle 8 and you see a fair trade stamp on the coffee bag, you can further ask yourself, but how does the company actually operating as a whole, beyond just the product? So what's B-Lab doing? The mission of B-Lab is to harness the power of business to address social and environmental problems. The reason why we're doing this is because we do see government and nonprofit necessary, but insufficient alone to really spark this change. And so we work on 3 initiatives. One is to shine a light on the entrepreneur, and that's building a community of certified B Corps. The second is to really remove legal impediments for the entrepreneur, and that's advancing public policy, known as benefit corporation. And the third is to really drive capital through impact investments, and that's called GEARS, Global Impact Investing Rating System. So again, you'll see those 3 pillars. We're working on the entrepreneurs, supporting them. The second is making sure that they're protected through cases like Ben & Jerry's, or even smaller companies wanting to just bring in first-round investment. But then the third, of really making sure that those companies are protected through those changes. So what is a B Corporation? Goodman's is a perfect example. But these companies are meeting higher standards of social and environmental performance. Not only that, but higher standards of transparency, and then they're legally accountable to make sure that impact stays intact. That's stakeholder consideration. So who are the B Corps? These are just a few, probably some that you can go home and your mom might recognize, or your daughter. But Warby Parker is a pretty exciting one. Etsy just recently certified. Patagonia certified beginning of this year. Cascade Engineering is a manufacturing plant doing injection molding. Very alternative thinking of a business that's typically in quite a bit of a carbon creating industry, but really dedicating it back to giving a lot of their benefits to their employees and really helping spark a lot of change in Michigan. The numbers are a little outdated. By Monday, we will have 600 B Corps, and that $1 billion in revenue will be up to 4.5, because our biggest company is certified as of yet will be certifying on Monday. That's about $1 billion cooperative. It is across 60 industries, so this isn't industry specific. It's not just the coffee, it's not just the chocolate, it's not just sustainability consultants. What we're seeing is that there's a lot of actually service-to-service companies that are looking at this because there really wasn't a way for them to differentiate themselves in the past. If you think of a consultant working with companies and they say, well, I want to make sure you're kind of walking the talk that you're talking to us about, there hasn't been something like this that they can say, yeah, look at me, I'm transparent about it, and this is an accreditation by someone independent of me. A lot of these companies, and this is something Adam was talking about earlier, they were doing this before B-Lab even existed. A lot of companies say, I've been a B Corp forever before you guys even put a brand on it. And that's what we're here for. We're here to reaffirm that these companies have been doing this and make sure they're getting the recognition for doing so. And then also some cost benefits and community gathering and things of that sort. So who are the B Corps here in Arizona? Sorry that Goodman's didn't make it up there, but I figured since he's going to talk, we'll put it up. He'll have time to talk and also space. But Carter Law Group, and these are some of the reasons why they chose to certify. And so when you go up to our site, you can go in the directory. You can look at some of your favorite companies, see how they're matching up against others in the community. But then you can also see reasons why and as well of how they make themselves different and the change that they seek. Journey Healing Centers, I just visited with them earlier yesterday, actually. They're up in Scottsdale. It's a rehabilitation clinic for drug and alcohol abuse. And they just certified about 3 weeks ago. So the assessment. So this is when companies are meeting higher standards of social and environmental performance. We look at different areas. We look at how they treat their workers. We look at their community involvement. We look at their environmental impact, as well as their overall governance. Do they have a board? What percentage of women make up that board? Are they hiring from underrepresented populations? What's the equity structure of salaries from the highest paid employee to the lowest? And then it gets down to what people really see as sustainability at the forefront of a lot of their green initiatives. And it can get as small as, like we were talking earlier, about how do you recycle your e-waste? Is it a written policy, or is it something that's commonly understood, or have you never talked to your employees about it? So this really looks beyond of just what your product is or your practices in manufacturing, but how are you actually engaging your employees on everything that you're doing? Are you bringing them together monthly, asking them how their job is? And then also, are you including stakeholders from outside your business for them to give you feedback on the impact that your business is having on them? And so to be eligible, companies have to score 80 points out of a total possible 200. I'm guessing that this is a fairly academic audience, and so that initially goes to, okay, that's a 40%, and that would be a failing grade in most of our classes. But the reason why we do that is 80 is very difficult to hit. We do have a lot of companies that come in and say, I'm going to nail your assessment. I'm going to score 180 points. I can't believe you don't have companies that aren't in the 170 mark. But it's a humbling experience when they go through the assessment and they score 50 or 60 points, and they see it more as a journey of, okay, well, this is where we thought we were. Maybe there's some things that we can further implement, talk to people about, get some outside consulting to focus on these different areas that before we thought we were doing really well in. As well as we always want companies to know that there's always more to do. And so like Patagonia, for example, they're well known for being kind of a leader in the outdoor apparel industry in terms of their sustainability and tracking their jackets and fair labor standards. But they scored 110 points. And so it's a great for them to be able to take it back and say, what else can we do? And they're going through tons of standards. I mean, B certification is one out of 30 different assessments that they're taking. They have teams dedicated to each of these. But to go in and visit the factories and see what more they can do and look at the community as a whole to learn from others. And so you'll see partnerships between B Corps. So I know Goodman's works with Dirt, Do It Right this time, and you'll see a lot of these companies figuring ways to work together to really bring the power of their business beyond just their specific industry. This is an example of what you'd see on the site. And so for any of those companies in Arizona or some of your favorites outside of that, you can search the company in the directory, takes a look at their scores, some of the subcategories, and then the bottom right, you'll see highlights. So those are some things that the company wants to show that they feel like the assessment is not really reflecting or telling their consumers or service providers, whatever it may be. And they can put up their video, they can put up logos, whatever it is. But this is where the transparency requirement that every company must put on, and this is open for anybody who logs onto the site. So this is the accountability requirement. What we also require is that companies put in a stakeholder consideration into their corporate charter or their operating agreement, depending on their corporate structure. Right now, Arizona is not what we call a constituency state, so there's not a constituency statute which allows directors to actually put in a stakeholder consideration into their agreement. That's about 30 states out of 50. California was one as well, but that's really the need for why we're pushing Benefit Corporation. If you see this community of certified B Corps, it's more than just a marketing standpoint. It's more than just differentiating them. It's actually building a constituency of companies saying we need a new model. We need something that legally protects us. Certification is a step in that direction, but Benefit Corporation is really the ultimate vision of making sure that we're legally protected to be considering these things other than financial gain. We are working on a B Corp index, and so a lot of people say, well, how is the B Corp community compared to the wider economy on a whole in terms of performance? Well, what we've been able to do is we've had about 10,000 logins into our assessment. The assessment is completely free. And so a lot of companies just come to the assessment, use it as a benchmarking tool, never talk to us, and that's a win for us. If we see more engagement from businesses wanting to track these types of things, posing new questions with their directors or their night shift janitor, whoever it is that is really engaging in what their business can be doing for good, is something that we're really proud about. And it also allows us to build this index so that we can see that on average, B Corps are scoring around 108 points, and then the 9,000 if my math's right, 9,400 other companies are scoring around 86 on average. We call those other sustainable businesses because they took the initiative to go through the assessment. But they're not being accredited, they're not going to reviews, they're not going through the due diligence of these other companies that are actually providing required documentation and such. So our second one, which I think more people are interested in, is really removing these legal impediments for companies, similar to Ben Jerry's case, of really making sure these companies can keep these values intact. And so 11 states have passed. Most recently, last week was Massachusetts. Before that was Illinois. And then actually the 2 weeks prior were South Carolina and Louisiana. And so what you can see is that there's a lot of bipartisan support. This isn't just some liberal thinking, coming out of a hippie town and hippie ice cream and going around their VW bus and creating a business out of it. This is really protecting businesses in your state, keeping the tax dollars there, creating jobs, and keeping it localized. And so it's been really inspiring for us to hear from Louisiana doing it completely unsolicited, and doing it really on their own regard. And Massachusetts really did it according to their own economic stimulus of saying, well, New York passed it, so we need to get on board too because we're a little competitive with them. And on that note, New Mexico and Texas are moving forward. So if you have any competition with them, we can start moving forward as well and get Arizona up ahead of them. And we all know that Delaware is kind of the big beast in the room. About 40% of the certified B Corps are incorporated in Delaware. Not a beast in a negative regard, but there's obviously a lot of incorporation there due to their tax benefits and things of that sort. So what is a benefit corp? A benefit corp is just like any other traditional company, except for 3 reasons. One is that they're purpose-driven, so they're creating general public benefit for society and the environment, not just profit. The second one is that they're accountable for this, and so it's actually written into their corporate charter, right at the top of their corporate charter, and I'll get into a little bit more of the specifics about that. And then also transparent, and so they have to produce an annual report that's available to anybody if they request it. It's on our site on benefitcorp.net, and it goes to a third-party standard. It does not have to go through our assessment. The reason why we did that is because we understand that our assessment's not perfect for every business, and it's always evolving. And that's why we call ourselves B-Lab, is because we're being very pragmatic. It's more of an experiment. We're hearing feedback from companies about how it can be better, but we know that for a food company, it might be better to go towards a new standard like Sustainable Food Trade Association or outdoor apparel company working with the new eco index that's coming out. So we really want to make sure that's an open field that's always evolving, always improving. And so, there is a lot of confusion, very understandably, between benefit corporation and certified B corporation. It was 100% manifested by us by putting corporation in the certification stamp. But what we see is that it's really building a movement forward that's really combining all two of these groups. So to kind of put it in a nutshell, a certified B corporation goes through the assessment, hits 80 points as a threshold, goes through our review, and it's more of a housekeeping seal. That's when you get all the benefits of the marketing, getting the service offers. The benefit corporation is actually a state legal entity. Similar to LLC, S Corp, C Corp, a company can now choose to be a benefit corporation. Taxed the same as an S Corp, taxed the same as a C Corp. It just gives the directors an opportunity to consider other things beyond just financial gain. So where is it now? Very small map, but that's where you can see. When you see the states in gray, those are states that it's on the desk, and those are pending. Like I said, we do have New Mexico and Texas moving forward. We would love to make Arizona gray, which is a positive gray. And then these are some contacts. If you want to contact anybody from within B-Lab, that's our Director of Policy, Eric Trojan. He's based in our New York office. And then also Chris Petroff and Courtney Klein. Chris is here in the back of the room. He's from SeedSpot, which is a business incubator in Phoenix. And he would be a great resource. He's kind of taken the reins to start this movement. And we just been on the phone with him the last few months, but we're pretty excited to see where this goes. And this site is benefitcorp.net. And so you can go on there. We're trying to update it as often as we can, but you can see a list of the companies that have become benefit corporations. California, for example, it just passed on January 3rd, and we have about 65 companies that are benefit corps. Patagonia did both. By January 3rd, they certified as a B Corp, and they were on the steps in Sacramento incorporating as a benefit corporation. If Yvon Chouinard from Patagonia wants to do something, he's going to do it. But he's been running the company for 60 years, and he wants to make sure it's a 100-year company, no matter what happens. The last one is really driving capital to these entrepreneurs through gears, impact investments. And so you think of like a Morningstar or a Moody's rating, really looking at quarterly return. What we've done is kind of flip that on its head using GRI and other resources, other standards to really allow companies to demonstrate to their investors or funds that they're really creating positive social and environmental impact. This is using the same assessment that companies are using to certify. It just has an added addendum according to whether they're in a developed market or an emerging market. A majority of the companies that so far have been getting this rating are actually coming from more emerging markets. But what we've been hearing is from a lot of these funds and investors that actually they're requesting that companies go through this rating before considering them for investment. So this was launched last year at the Clinton Global Initiative. It was a hot topic this year as well. And for all certified B Corps, they get a free gears rating. And so we can just transfer that data over. So if a company says, listen, I'm not looking at capital right now, but I might be wanting to down the line, we can build that into kind of an analytics report that they can present to their investor. Again, a lot of this is about stories. A company being able to tell the story to a potential investor saying, this is the good I'm doing, I'm dropping off solar lanterns in Uganda and look at all this great impact. This is really making sure that you can really track that performance and that it goes a step further. How are those solar lanterns being dropped off? Are you also developing an entrepreneurial activity there? So it's not just a buy one, give one, drop off, but really making sure that you're really sustaining those local living economies. And so I think this might be the last slide. And this is just a quote from Yvon Chouinard. This is when he came up, he's the founder, CEO of Patagonia. He came up to Sacramento, drove up with his team from Ventura, California. And this is something he's been really wanting for a long time. He's started a lot of great initiatives like 1% for the planet. Obviously, Patagonia, at the forefront of their mission is to create high-quality products. But beyond that, it's really reducing the amount of impact, negative impact that they could be creating in that process. But for them, it was 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we'll look back and know that this was the start of a revolution. This is really a new sector of the economy of really seeing what these companies can do together. And the community is large, it's diverse, there's companies in different sectors of the economy, but what they have in common is that they're really examining and exploring what they can do together and how they can change the world through business. So I'm gonna leave it at that. The best part of talking about B-Lab is the conversation. So really, if any questions are flowing through your head, happy to discuss it with you. And really, really thank you for bringing us down.
Okay, that's Andy Fife with B-Lab. Thank you, Andy. Now I'd like to go ahead and ask Adam Goodman with Goodman's Interior Structures to come on up. He's the president and CEO. So, Adam.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me here. Glad to be here. I'm going to give you a little overview of how we got to where we are with this whole journey, and so I'm going to give you a little bit of a personal background, and then get into the culture of the company. It is, I think we're an interesting case study on this because we're not a traditional social entrepreneurship company in a typical industry that you might think. We're an office furniture company, for God's sakes. We're, these are desks and chairs and files and conference tables and cubicles. This is not what you might traditionally see in other B Corps. This Goodman's is Phoenix-based. We're in Phoenix, Tucson, and Albuquerque. So glad to hear about New Mexico. That's good news. We are. My grandfather founded the company in 1954. So I'm the third generation owner of the business. And there's Rob Stenson, runs our Tucson office there. Just a little shout out, say hi. Hi, Rob. Look, this is a very mature industry that we're in, being an office furniture dealer. We represent Herman Miller, so there's the manufacturer on one side, and we distribute their products. I, growing up, knew I did not want to be in the office furniture business because it was so boring, right? My ambition going through college was to be a newspaper publisher. Joke's on me. Look at newspapers now, right? But I knew I could have the most impact on the community by becoming a newspaper publisher. I still believe, in the value of a newspaper to inform the citizenry in a democracy. Right? This is a passion of mine. So I went to work for Gannett newspapers, which diffused the passion a little bit, but that's another speech. And at some point, my father came to me after I'd been at Gannett for a few years, and he said, look, if you ever want to get back in the family business, this is the time to do it, right? You might want to try it now. And he talked to me about the benefits of owning your own business and this kind of thing. Okay, fine, I'll try it. So I moved back to Phoenix and got involved. And I must say I was pretty energized by learning about a new business, and it was kind of an exciting getting involved in the business, but still, it was desks and chairs and files and conference tables and cubicles. And as I rose through the ranks of leadership, while I might have been excited by the challenge, I wasn't exactly fulfilled by the challenge, shall we say. And an interesting thing's going on. I mean, the Goodmans, the company, grew as this marketplace grew, right? You can chart it right along with it. And as our industry became more and more competitive, what starts to happen is the manufacturers who make the furniture, they start innovating for the sake of innovation, right? At some point, it's no longer about market-based innovation or research-based innovation. It's just plain goofy innovation for the sake of innovation. to look at, hey, look at my gee whiz, golly gee chair that I've got here, and look how funky it is, will you please buy it? Everything gets so crowded and obscured so that you can't really tell what's the real, true research-based innovations, and it's hard to differentiate. So back to your point about differentiation. I'm looking at this wondering how am I going to take this company forward in third generation, as a third generation leader, and differentiate ourselves. I became president in about 2003, and I was really getting very curious about this question, and I wanted to be able to differentiate ourselves regardless of the products we represent. And what, of course, the answer came down to, and everybody here knows, is it's about the people, right? It's about attracting and retaining the best talent. I struck up a relationship at the time with the CEO of Herman Miller, a gentleman named Brian Walker, who's somewhat of a mentor to me. And Brian, at around the same time that I'm struggling with this differentiation issue, he said something pretty profound to me. He talked about employees are going to demand a sense of purpose from their employers. And in fact, he said that he thinks that defining that sense of purpose is going to be one of the most difficult challenges that companies have, but it's also going to be the most important thing to attract and retain top talent. And that prompted a lot of questions in my head, which is, what is the purpose of Goodman's, actually, right? Are we here just to sell widgets, just to desks and chairs and files and conference and cubicles? Is that it? Is that what gets our people out of bed in the morning? To sell more widgets? Is that what gets me out of bed in the morning? Oh, and by the way, what happened to that kid who wanted to be a newspaper publisher and, change the community and all that? And so I'm wrestling with all those issues. This has all inspired me then to go out and talk to as many people as I could, our stakeholders, right? So our customers and our employees, and hundreds of conversations with hundreds of pages of notes that go with it. And it was a plane flight from Orlando to Phoenix, where I finally collected all of these documents and I read it all to kind of distill what I had heard. And on that plane flight, I realized that an office furniture dealership, when it's properly framed, on one level it looks so pedestrian, just selling products, right? But on another level, when you properly frame what we do, we actually are changing the community. And it was from listening to the customers. So I'll give you a couple examples. We deal in 4 customer segments. There's healthcare, government, education, higher education, and corporate, right? So we know when we work with our healthcare customers, we know that the work we do in a patient room, for example, to make the patient more comfortable or to make the patient's family more comfortable, we know that that's helping to improve the patient's healing process, and that there is a pretty significant and important thing. We look at that as helping to change the community simply by helping patients to heal. I can say the same thing about our higher education clients. We know when we help design classrooms or the administrative offices that help support the classrooms, we know the work we're doing is ultimately going to help students to learn. That's a pretty ambitious, lofty goal, to change the community. We know with our government customers, we actually can document, we can lower the cost of government doing business. That's an awfully profound thing to do. If you're a taxpayer, that's a good thing, and that's helping to change the community. And finally, for our corporations, we know when we get engaged with corporations, we're helping our customers to become more competitive so they can attract and retain the top talent, and they can achieve whatever strategic objective they're looking to do. That's helping to change the community. So suddenly you step back and look at it and say, well, son of a gun, Goodman's isn't here just selling widgets. We're actually here to change the community. And that became the vision statement for the company. We are here to change the community. I'm going to read you the full vision statement I wrote on that flight, and it still today is up on our forefront of our minds here. At Goodman's, we will change our communities. We will move our communities beyond the call centers, beyond the back offices, beyond the branch operations. We will create the communities of world-class employers who attract top talent from across the country. We will encourage energetic entrepreneurs to take risks in search of the newest new thing. We will teach executives to harness the power of design to transform their companies into vibrant enterprises of engaged workers. We will leverage design to inspire better learning outcomes for students. We will build healthcare environments that promote healing. We will create value for stockholders, taxpayers, students, and patients by decreasing expenses in our corporations, government agencies, schools, and hospitals. We will build communities that take care of its sick, support their weak, inspire their artists, protect their resources, and promotes faith for the citizenry. At Goodman's, we will change our communities, and we will do it by establishing ourselves as an example with style, humor, compassion, integrity, and respect. Office furniture dealer selling widgets? I don't think so, right? We got a lot more that we have to offer. At the same time, I also, again, distilling all these notes from customers and employees. This is one plane flight, by the way. I wrote our values, which is not the traditional way to do it, where the CEO just sits down and writes the values of the company. I don't recommend that. But I felt I had heard so much information, I took a stab at it anyway. There's 4 values. I'll go through them really quickly here. There's one, there's nothing more important than the welfare of our people, right? There is nothing more important than the welfare of our people. Number 2, connectedness. Connectedness means we're not isolated. We're not on an island, that we're part of a larger community. We're part of a larger industry. We're part of a larger country. We're part of a larger planet. And as members of all those organizations, we've got responsibilities. And that's connectedness. Improvement is just what it sounds like. Nothing fancy there. And imagination, also just what it sounds like. Once we had that framework as our vision and our values, my job then became to just drive this through the organization and challenge all of our leaders, all of our employees really, as to how can you take this values and this vision and push it as far as possible, really challenge people to push it to the extreme, to the absurd, and see what becomes of us. And this became my primary role. And sure enough, the vision inspired people as to why they come to work any day. And suddenly it reframed everything from our repair technician, for example, the guy who goes out and fixes chairs in a hospital, suddenly realizes that his role ain't just to fix chairs in a hospital, but he's got, if there's say a recliner down that the patient sits in to help them ambulate, he is helping that patient to heal. This is a significant contribution. And whammo, we've got him engaged in something much larger than himself. I'll give you some examples of how all these things sort of roll out. The connectedness thing in particular, this drives our sustainability issues, right? So we're a LEED certified building. We have a whole bunch of programs that support the community. Hopefully you all are familiar with our Goodman's Eye for the Good Guy contest. Every year 8 years in a row now, we look for the executive director of a nonprofit who's the most deserving executive director of a nonprofit, and we give them a complete office makeover. So this past year, Ben's Bell's got a complete office makeover from that. There's a nod. Yep, got a couple nods there. That's good. And nominations are coming open soon. GoodmansGoodGuy.com. That website again, GoodmansGoodGuy.com. If you know a nonprofit that deserves an office makeover. We have an employee here in Tucson who's a foster parent. This is a good story. She's a foster parent, and she is bemoaning the fact that the state is cutting funding for foster families. And she says to us, okay, Goodmans, if the vision of Goodmans is to change the communities, and there is no clothing bank for foster children in Tucson, in southern Arizona. Phoenix has got several, but Tucson has none. We've got a warehouse, right? We've got idle hands at lunchtime where people can actually fold clothes and sort clothes. Why don't we become the foster clothing bank? Now, that obviously has nothing to do with furniture, but if our mission is to change the community, then she's absolutely right. We've got the resources, we've got the capacity. So I'm proud to tell you the Good Threads program, Goodman's is the foster clothing bank in southern Arizona. It's this kind of thing that we're looking for our employees, again, like I said, push us into finding other ways that we can get involved in the community. So this becomes the culture of who we are, right? It was around 2010, late 2010, I think, that I heard a piece on NPR about B Corps. Never heard of it before. And 5:30 in the morning, pre-workout, I spend an hour online filling out this assessment that you're talking about here, and scored above 80. I don't remember what it was, but above 80. Now, the assessment is quite rigorous. And of course, I didn't have all the data in my head. I mean, as I was giving an example at lunch, the questions are like, how much energy savings did you have this year over last year? Well, I don't know, but 6%, I guess, right? I just made up some conservative numbers, and we passed. Well, then it's not that easy. Then you have to go back and document everything that you said, and that takes a long time, and that's a rather arduous process. So we went through months of that documentation and pulling the data and all that, and sure enough, my guesses were pretty close to being accurate, and then we were, in 2011, we became the second certified, no, what's the proper phrasing? How do you say it? Accredited? What did you say? Certified. That is right? In Arizona? All right. The terms confuse even me, as you can see. So we're extremely proud, right? This is a reaffirmation of of what we are and who we are, what we do. Our employees are very proud to be a B Corp. And here's the interesting question that I'm sure you're all been wondering in your heads as I'm speaking. So what are the customers saying? And pretty much, customers are interested in us being the low price. They don't really care very much. And if we're the low price, they're very proud. They're very pleased to do business with us. Then it all works out nicely. But otherwise, it's a lot of blank stares. And in fact, I'm not happy about this or proud to say this, but I think our employees have had a little bit of fatigue trying to, tell people about it and tout. It sounds so self-promotional, frankly, and when we're accustomed to blank stares so long that sometimes it just doesn't. Oftentimes it doesn't even come up. This is for our own edification and for us to be proud of, and that's really how we use it. I mean, it's on the window, decals are up, and we got that, but we don't get asked very often. But that's okay. That's not what we're here for. So I guess in the final analysis, before I turn it over, I'll say the important lesson I think here is it's critical that it's part of the culture of the company. You can't shape the company to fit the assessment, right? You either are or you aren't. Now there's some things you can do to maybe help you go along the way, but it's a fundamental DNA issue about a company, and that's it. Thanks.
Okay, that was Adam Goodman with Goodman Interior Structures. And I'd like to now ask our final panelist, Professor Bill Sjostrom, to come on up and address the audience. Bill?
Thanks, Paul. So just so you guys know, I am not an expert on business or benefit corporation law. Paul asked me if I would do the symposium, I don't know, a month or two ago, so I started reading up on it, and so I'm building some expertise there. My expertise is in corporate law and securities law, but I had heard of a benefit corporation, and I knew it was something I should get up to speed on, so thanks for inviting me, because it gave me motivation to get up to speed on this, and I've learned quite a lot about benefit corporations in the last month or so, and so I'm going to share some of that stuff with you. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to touch on four questions that were in my head as I was looking at this new type of entity. 4 legal questions, and so here they are. So I'm going to talk about what the advantages from a legal perspective are of being a benefit corporation. It probably should say advantage because I only came up with one advantage. And number 2, and this might be relevant to Adam, can a traditional or non-benefit corporation pursue a social mission? Number 3, should Arizona enact the model benefit corporation legislation that B-Lab is promoting? And then finally, and this question actually came from Adam the other day on the phone, what happens when a benefit corporation is sold? So those are the 4 questions I'm going to address from a legal perspective. So let's start with the first one. Just to be clear, and this is a distinction Andy touched on, but I want to repeat it because it's important for understanding what I'm talking about, and there's a lot of confusion on it. So when someone uses the term B Corp, they can be referring to one of 2 distinct concepts. So a B Corp could mean a benefit corporation. A benefit corporation is a legal entity that's incorporated in a state that has a benefit corporation statute. And as Andy mentioned, there's what, 11 states that have this benefit corporation statute. So if you're a corporation incorporated in a state that has a benefit corporation statute, and you've elected to be governed by that statute, you're a benefit corporation. And some people use the term B Corp to refer to a benefit corporation. Other people use the term B Corp to refer to a business like Adams, a corporation that has been certified by B Labs as meeting their criteria. So that can be referred to as a B Corp as well, but they're two distinct things. And so what I'm going to be talking about is the benefit corporation, kind of the legal conception of a B Corp, and not the certified B corporation, which is a corporation that has B Labs certification. All right. And so, like I said, I only came up with one legal advantage, and you know, it's a big one. It's an important one. As it says up there, opting in to being a benefit corporation, because like I said, it's a choice a corporation can make, removes uncertainty regarding the board of directors' exposure to lawsuits for pursuing a social mission, for pursuing something other than maximizing shareholder value. So let me touch on why there is legal uncertainty in this area, because that might be surprising to some. I don't know. It's not surprising to me, but I teach corporations, so I already know this stuff, right? So under corporate law, and this is a corporate law of all states, either pursuant to statute or pursuant to common law, as it says here, a director is required to act in a manner the director reasonably believes to be in the best interests of the corporation. So that falls under what's called the fiduciary duty of loyalty. That's a statement of the fiduciary duty of loyalty recognized by the corporate law of all 50 states. So what does best interest mean? Well, best interest means, or most people think best interest means, maximizing shareholder value. So corporate law statute says you have to act in the best interest of the corporation. Most people, most corporate law folks, if you ask them, well, what does that mean? It means you're supposed to maximize shareholder value. Now, the statute doesn't actually say that, and there's not a ton of case law out there that actually says it. But that's the common perception, and that's a standard answer you'd get from someone like me or from someone else versed in corporate law. Okay, so the big legal advantage of being a B Corp is that, a benefit corporation, is that under the benefit corporation statute, it specifically says that the board is allowed to pursue objectives other than maximizing shareholder value. So that's how it removes the uncertainty. The statute specifically says that you can focus on things other than maximizing shareholder value. You know, sustainability, treating your employees right, giving back to the community, all that sort of stuff. You're good to go under the benefit corporation, and so this uncertainty is removed. So that's the big legal advantage. Let's move on to question number 2. And question number 2, again, is can a traditional or non-benefit corporation pursue a social mission? And in my mind, the analysis starts here by asking in which state the corporation is incorporated. And in case you weren't aware, a business can incorporate in any state, regardless of where it's operating. So just because a business is operating in Arizona, is based in Arizona, has all its sales in Arizona, doesn't mean it has to incorporate in Arizona. It can incorporate in any state it wants. And so, you know, a lot of times when I'm talking to business people, I'll ask them, well, what state are you incorporated in? And the reason I ask that is because corporate law varies by state. There's a lot of uniformity, but there is variation. And some, like roughly 32 states, I think, have included in their corporate law these things called constituency statutes. And so here's an example of a constituency statute. This is from the Ohio Corporate Code. And basically, it provides the flexibility I was just talking about. You know, it says the director in determining what the director believes to be in the best interest of a corporation may consider employees, suppliers, creditors, the economy, community and social considerations, the long-term as well as short-term interests of the corporation and its shareholders. And so when I look at this, it strikes me that if you're a traditional corporation incorporated under the law of a state that has a constituency statute, you shouldn't have any legal concerns about pursuing a social mission because there's your cover right there in this constituency statute. Okay? So that's why I say the first question I would ask in looking at this question is, well, are you incorporating a state that has constituency statute? If yes, then I would actually need to look at the constituency statute. The one we just looked at was from Ohio. It's very broad, as you saw. You can basically consider any good causes you want to. That's not true with all constituency statutes. Some of them, and Arizona is among these states, some of them only apply to public companies that are in the midst of being taken over. And the reason that's the case, I'll give you a quick history lesson on constituency statutes. These came into play in the 1980s, the days of the corporate raiders, where these corporate raiders were coming in, buying up companies, busting them off, closing down headquarters, laying people off, that sort of stuff. States started getting nervous about that. The board of directors said, well, we can't do a lot to fight off these corporate raiders because we're supposed to maximize shareholder value. They're coming in offering a premium over our market price. We feel that we legally have to sell to them. So what did states do? They passed these constituency statutes saying you can take these other things into consideration. The fact that if you sell to them, they're going to break up the company, close down the headquarters, and lay off all these people in the state, you can take that into consideration in fighting from being taken over. So that's the history of these statutes. So some states have very broad ones like Ohio. Arizona has a much narrower one. It only applies to public companies, and it only applies in the takeover context, meaning directors can take that stuff into account only when resisting being taken over. Okay? So that's what I mean. Well, what's the breadth of the constituency statute? Because if it's narrow, it doesn't provide cover, really, for a traditional business pursuing a social mission. And like I said, Arizona's is narrow. A lot of states are narrow as well. Vermont, in particular, they adopted a constituency statute in 1998, and it was referred to as the Ben and Jerry statute because it was put in there to help Ben and Jerry's resist the Unilever takeover that was mentioned earlier, which gives rise to some of the questions concerning their claim that they had to sell. But anyway, that one isn't as broad as Ohio because it only applies to public companies. Ben and Jerry's public, it would apply to them. But if you're private, like Goodman's, it wouldn't apply. It applies outside of the takeover context, but only public companies. Okay, so then if you look at the statute and either there's no constituency statute, which is a situation like in 19 states, or the constituency statute is too narrow, meaning it only applies to public companies or it only applies in the takeover context, then the next thing I'd want to look at is the purpose provision of the company's charter. Charter is another word for articles of incorporation. So when you incorporate, one of the things you have to put in your paperwork is the purpose of your business, basically. Now, the standard legal advice is, well, for purpose, you just say any legal activity. That's kind of the standard purpose. So the purpose clause doesn't have a lot of effect for most businesses because it basically says our purpose is to do whatever we want. And that passes muster. But what I'm suggesting is a traditional corporation pursuing a social mission, concerned about the legal uncertainty as to the flexibility of its board to pursue something other than maximizing shareholder value, could put a more specific purpose provision in its charter saying that our purpose, among other things, is to do X, Y, Z. Oh, and we will maximize shareholder value too. Or we'll at least take that into account. So I would next go to the purpose provision of the charter to see if it says anything there. There's a good chance it won't unless, the company has gotten legal counsel involved and they decided to amend the charter, that sort of stuff. If there's nothing there, then the next question I would look at is the corporation statements regarding mission. Okay, and here's what I mean by that. So you know, we have the standard, you have to maximize shareholders' value. So what does that mean? I mean, one way to maximize shareholder value for the long term, you could say, well, it's to do right by your community, treat your employees right, treat the environment right, that sort of stuff. In our view, as a board of directors, maximizes long-term shareholder value. If that's the kind of stuff the company is saying, I think that's entirely consistent with your mission and vision. I mean, if you're doing it, if you were put on the stand and someone was challenging you as a board member for breach of fiduciary duty, I would ask you, well, why did you put that mission in place? And you would say, well, I think it's the right thing to do, but also I think it will maximize long-term shareholder value. That's kind of the end of the case then. That's kind of the end of the case. So what I'm saying, there's enough flexibility under corporate law, traditional corporate law, to pursue a social mission, as Goodman's exemplifies. I mean, because there's been these kind of social mission corporations out there well before the Benefit Corp statute existed. There is some legal uncertainty, and so from a legal standpoint, it would be cleaner if you guys were a benefit corporation, but I don't find it problematic that you're not. And you know, if a corporation's board is accused of not maximizing shareholder value, that doesn't mean they've broken the law. They're not engaging in illegal conduct. What it means is that they may get sued by their shareholders for breach of fiduciary duty. And there's other protections in place that the shareholders probably won't be able to get at the board of directors members' personal assets. There's a lot of other difficulties with bringing a suit like that. And so the likelihood of it ever happening to a traditional corporation is pretty low, and the likelihood of the shareholders actually prevailing is pretty low. I mean, the one case you hear about is like from 1920 in Michigan, where the Dodge brothers were suing Henry Ford because he wasn't paying them a dividend, and they thought, well, you're not paying us a dividend because you know we're going to set up a competing car company to go against you, and you're trying to block that. And so Ford lost the case because he got up on the stand and he was asked, you know, why aren't you paying a dividend? And if he would have said something like, I think it's in the long-term best interest of the shareholders to keep the money in the corporation to invest in the future. He didn't say that. He said, well, I'm not paying a dividend because I need the money because I want to make a car I can price as low as possible so lots of people can buy the cars, and I don't care if we make a profit. He said that, and so that's why he lost. And the interesting thing is that's a case that still shows up in all the business organizations' textbooks, maybe in part because it's really the only case that came out that way. And it only came out that way because I suppose you could say Ford was honest as to what he was doing. He basically admitted he wasn't making decisions on the basis of maximizing shareholder value. He was making decisions on the basis of what's best for the community, and he thought it was best for the community if as many people as possible could buy a Ford, whether or not they made a lot of money on it or not. Okay, so that's that. Now, one thing a traditional corporation could do, and here I'm thinking more a private company, not a public company, if they're worried about the legal uncertainty that hangs out there if they're incorporated under a statute that doesn't have a constituency statute or that has a narrow constituency statute. You know, as a lawyer, you know, taking a conservative approach, I would tell the company to reorganize as a limited liability company. And the reason I would say that is because there's much more flexibility under the limited liability company or LLC statute than there is under a corporate statute. Under the LLC statute, in a sense, you can kind of write your own rules by putting it in what's called the operating agreement, which is kind of the foundational document for the company. And so you could write right into your operating agreement that our goal is not to maximize, it's not shareholder, it'd be member value. Because LLC, just as a quick aside, LLCs don't have shareholders, they have members. The statute refers to them as members. So you could put right in that document, our goal is not to maximize member value, but to do these other things, and then list them specifically. And then I think that takes away all the legal uncertainty. But that would involve transaction costs. You have to convert from a corporation to an LLC. But that's certainly a possibility. Okay, so that's the end of that question. So let's talk about Arizona specifically, because I have some thoughts on this. Andy probably won't like them, but I will share them with you. Okay. So I mentioned before this internal affairs doctrine, although I don't think I use that label. So here's what the internal affairs doctrine provides. It says the business entity statute that applies to your business is the statute of the state in which the entity is organized or incorporated. So like I said before, a business can incorporate in any state they want. If you're an Arizona company and you incorporate in Delaware, the Delaware corporate statute applies to your business, to your corporation. The Arizona corporate statute does not. That's pursuant to this internal affairs doctrine. So if Goodman's wants to be a benefit corporation, they can reincorporate in one of the 11 states that has a benefit corporation statute. And so when you think about it that way, the fact that Arizona hasn't enacted benefit corporate legislation doesn't prevent Arizona companies from operating as benefit corporations. They would just need to incorporate in one of the 11 states that has the statute. That doesn't mean they move to that state. They don't have to have a presence in that state at all. Technically, you have to have an office in the state, but there's these companies out there that are in the business of providing an address to companies. So there's this company called CT Corp, and you pay them, I don't know, $500 a year. So if you're an Arizona company, you want to incorporate in Delaware because that's the cool thing to do. You don't have to actually open an office in Delaware. You hire CT Corp, you essentially rent their address, and you list them as your registered agent, registered office in Delaware. So there are some transaction costs with being an Arizona corporation incorporated under another state's corporate code, but they aren't prohibitively expensive. In fact, they're probably less than $1,000 a year. Okay, so we're not talking big money here. So again, you can probably guess I'm somewhat ambivalent about Arizona adopting the model legislation, in part, just to repeat, because it's not that Arizona companies can't be benefit corporations unless we adopt the legislation. They can be. They just have to incorporate under the law of a different state. And so one way to look at it is if you think legislative time and effort is limited, and therefore we should prioritize what they should be spending their time and effort on, I wouldn't put adopting the benefit corporation legislation up there very high on the list. Okay, and then this too complicated comment goes specifically to the model benefit corporation legislation that's out there that a lot of states have been adopted. In looking at it, I think it's much more complicated than it needs to be. Andy touched on some of this, and you might not have caught it, but the legislation specifically provides that if you're a B corporation, you need to be certified by an outside third-party certifier. B Labs fills that role. And also, you need to furnish this report about your compliance with the certification. It strikes me that, I don't know, I guess I question why that needs to be built in the statute. I think it makes it more complicated. We have an example of a business right here who's not required to be certified by a third-party certifier, but has decided that it makes sense to do so, so they've done so. They haven't done so because they're statutorily required to, so it makes me wonder why we need to require that. And then the reporting piece, it strikes me as odd too, because we have nonprofit statutes. Nonprofits don't have this reporting piece. Nonprofits are similar to benefit corporations. They don't have this reporting piece. So why are we throwing at this benefit corporation? It just makes it more complicated. It also makes it more expensive for the benefit corporations itself. And the whole third-party certifier piece makes me somewhat uncomfortable because we've recently seen the problem with third-party certifiers in the financial crisis. Credit rating agencies They're third-party certifiers. That didn't work out so good. So there's that aspect too. And not saying anything about B-Lab, but you know, we're not limiting it to B-Lab. And so we could get some unscrupulous third-party certifiers who are just in it to make a buck and aren't really doing kind of what the legislation intended them to do. So that's some of my thoughts on whether Arizona should do it. I guess I would lean towards, I don't feel that strongly about it, but I wouldn't make it a high priority. I wouldn't make it a high priority. We have more important things to worry about. Okay, and so the final question is, what happens to a benefit corporation upon sale? And so if you're a benefit corporation, again, meaning you're organized in a state that has the benefit corporation statute, you've opted into it applying to your corporation, one of the things in that statute is if you're going to sell the company, the sale needs to be approved by a 2/3 vote of your shareholders. And that's 2/3 of outstanding shares, which is a very high voting standard. Under corporate law, it varies some by state, but under the Model Business Corporation statute, the voting standard for selling your company is more votes for than against. Basically, you need a quorum to show up at the meeting, and of those people there, more of them have to vote in favor of it than against, which is a very low standard. That means you could sell your company with 26% favorable vote. This is requiring a 66.7 favorable vote. And the idea there is if you're selling to someone that's not a B Corp, not a benefit corporation, you know, a lot of your shareholders may have invested in your company because you are a benefit corporation. So we'll set the standard really high. We'll set the vote high so that if, you know, more than 1/3 of your shareholders are against selling out, to especially to a company that's not a benefit corporation anymore, you won't be able to do it. So that's built in there. But one thing to keep in mind is that once the company is sold, the buyer can revoke the B corporation status. So if your benefit corporation sells out, you get the 2/3 vote, the buyer says, well, we like you because of all these good things you're doing. Post-deal, they can just revoke the benefit corporation status. You need a 2/3 vote to get that, but at that point, the benefit corporation only has one shareholder, the acquirer. And if they want to revoke it, they'll get the 2/3 vote. They'll get the 100% vote, right? And so in that situation, what the benefit corporation would need to do is get a contractual commitment from the buyer to continue with the same sort of mission. And that's something Ben & Jerry's did to some extent. Buyers often, though, push against that. You know, they don't want to be contractually hamstrung in because, you know, it's a changing marketplace and they might want to change accordingly. And so that's the only way to handle it. And, you know, as you probably guessed, once you sell something, it's kind of out of your hands anyway. So I suppose the answer shouldn't surprise you. All right, so that's the end of my questions.
Okay, so this is going to be kind of a free-flowing session. So who wants to go ahead and kick things off? You know, questions for our panelists. You know, we've got 15 to 20, you know, 10 to 15 minutes here, and we really want to try to make good use of everyone's time.
The B Corp journey was relatively simple. I mean, the certification process, it was just a matter of the documentation and proving what we had said. The earlier journey that happened in the early 2000s, that took several years of, you know, you've got to change a culture of a 50-something-year-old business, and that took some time and a lot of repetition on my part of driving it through. I mean, here's actually the truth. I told you I wrote that document on the flight from Orlando to Phoenix. I didn't show it to anybody for about a year, maybe a year and a half. I was kind of embarrassed because it was so ambitious, you know, and you know, it's just a little like, come on, you know, you're an office firm, and I had to get comfortable with it in my own body before I started sharing it, and it resonated, and as it built. Now we were aided by one other thing. This is a little off the record for you on the video camera here, but we went through a little cycle here, and we had to have some layoffs, right? And the people who weren't on board, who just didn't resonate, are no longer. They're nice people, but they're no longer part of the company. Yeah.
Changing culture, you're going to run into that resistance at some point.
Yes, yes, well, yes. Suddenly we have a very strong sense of what we do and who we are and who we want to be with us, and so we took that opportunity. Okay, you turn the camera back on now. There's a luxury, I think, of being a 58-year-old, third-generation family business, which is you've got that long vision, and it's not quarter to quarter, year to year. And so, no, it never crossed my mind, really, until you just asked the question that what we might be doing on one hand might be affecting the bottom line. It wasn't important, right? If this is what we're all about, this is what we're here for, then we're going to charge forward and pursue the mission. Good question.
We have no case law yet, so we don't have a publicly traded company that's become a B Corp. We have two companies that are certified B Corps, and they're public, but they're being traded under the table. So it's a paper company in San Jose, California, and a bank called New Resource Bank in San Francisco. We actually do expect, maybe at the end of this year or early next year, that two fronts. One, that a certified B Corp will go public, and a public company will certify as a B Corp. In terms of benefit corporation as a legal entity, correct. We don't have case law to actually show that, of what would hold up in court. But for a C Corp, if they're publicly traded, if they want to certify, they can. If they want to become a benefit corporation, they can. And it's completely built for that purpose, and you're still taxed the same. One thing I didn't talk about is, and a hot topic is, are there tax incentives for being a benefit corporation, the legal entity? In Philadelphia, they'll do a little bit of a tax incentive for sustainable business. Certified B Corps get that incentive. In San Francisco was the first city to pass beneficial legislation for benefit corporation. So what they did was they said, if a benefit corporation is applying for a contract bid with the city, they'll give them a procurement incentive, so 4 points up. So if they're in a pile, as long as it doesn't interfere with the preference for a nonprofit or a local business enterprise, LBE, benefit corps will get that 4-point leg up. But on your question, we don't have case law to prove it, but the purpose of why benefit corporation exists is hopefully to allow that to go smoothly.
So you asked impediments to an existing public corporation converting to a benefit corporation, right? The big impediment is that 2/3 vote. I don't see really any legal impediments, so we don't need to wait for any case law because it's not really a case law issue. The biggest thing is under the statute, you need 2/3 of outstanding stock to vote in favor of it. And so for a public corporation, it can be tricky to get that many shareholders to actually vote. You know, the rational, there's this thing we call rational shareholder apathy. My vote doesn't matter. This company is part of a larger portfolio. It doesn't make sense for me to put any time into voting. So companies struggle to get shareholders to vote. And so here they would not only have to get a lot of shareholders to vote, but a lot of shareholders to vote in favor of it. So that's the big impediment, the high voting standard. It'd be much easier to become a benefit corporation and then go public. Become a benefit corporation when you only have a handful of shareholders and they're all behind it, and then you go public. Then the underwriter will have a say as to whether that was a good idea, or I suppose the question will be whether you'll be able to attract an underwriter to take you public, what sort of valuation they'll give you, how they'll market it. Now, to me, it would be fascinating if a public corporation converted, because that would be a great market test as to how the market sees this legal distinction. Meaning, as soon as they convert, is the stock price going up, or is it going down, or is it staying flat? Because that would be an interesting thing to know, the market effect of an announcement of converting to a benefit corporation, which hasn't happened yet. But the big impediment is the 2/3 vote.
I know it was brought up earlier saying, why doesn't a company just become an LLC? One challenge with that is it's very difficult to get institutional investment as an LLC. They likely would not want to invest in your company. But you want to be a corporation, and you want to have that impact. You want to have kind of that dual mandate of not just maximizing profit, but doing this. And one other advantage I would say of becoming a benefit corporation is because you are making that statement to your investor prior to them looking at you making the list of Inc. 5000 and saying, okay, I see your revenue growth, I see you're creating jobs, I want to give you some investment. What the company isn't sure about is how aligned are you with my company as it is? Do you know that what I'm doing is I'm providing healthy meals to underprivileged schools around the country, or are you just looking at those metrics? And so for a company to have, I'm a benefit corporation, my purpose is to create general public benefit to society and the environment, to society and the environment, not just an extra objective like was stated earlier, that gives the investor not only the assurance that they know that this company is in it for the long run and not just finding a niche model and creating, financial gain quarterly, but it also allows the company to know that investor is 100% in line with that being at the top of their corporate charter. And that's been a huge thing for a lot of companies that are doing very successfully and starting to think about, should we bring on some institutional investment, but how are we going to be 100% sure that investor is aligned with who we are as a business and the model, not just our financial success.
Minority shareholders under the default rules don't have any teeth to begin with, so you're not losing any by investing in a B Corp, a benefit corporation, especially if there's a single controlling shareholder. That person has ultimate control over everything. So you probably actually have more protection with a benefit corporation because there's essentially additional regulation at the state level under the benefit corporation statute for that. And just my comment, he's exactly right that it's more difficult to raise capital as an LLC because a lot of institutional investors don't like to invest in pass-through entities and entities that are taxed under Subchapter K. Well, I'll skip that because it complicates their tax returns. But, for a closely held family business, that's not relevant. So it's going to be fact-specific as to whether the LLC would work. You can't really make general statements about whether it's better to go with an LLC or a benefit corporation. It depends on the actual circumstances.
We don't want to be competitive with those two areas. Obviously, there's a need for nonprofits. We're a nonprofit ourselves, and we're working with government to pass this legislation and work with procurement. Obviously, we stay away from too much of tax incentives. It doesn't really help the policy moving forward if it's a difficult economic time and people seeing this as earmarked with tax benefits for these companies. We do work with a lot of nonprofits. One of our key partners is 1% for the Planet. We do work with others such as Social Ventures Network, a lot of communities of companies that have been doing this in the past, and what we're seeing, how we can really explore the synergy between all of us. We're not competing with other standards. We work with those standards as those evolve and as ours evolve to make sure that we're asking the right questions. We're not reinventing the wheel. And so there's an organization called Sustainable Food Trade Association. They're really building the new standards for food. There's another one called Sustainable Apparel Council that's really doing it for outdoor apparel, working with the Eco Index, Outdoor Industry Association. We see that there's these very industry-specific standards coming out, and so we're working with all of them to make sure that they can use our standards in their implementation, and then we can use theirs as well. Because if we want to stick to this argument of making sure that, yes, there's a need for very specific standards, and that's why we offer 9 different evaluations, not certifications. A company does not need to get certified to incorporate as a benefit corp. There's no revenue generation to B-Lab if a company chooses to become a benefit corporation. And that should be very clear. And the reason why we do that is because this is nothing of bringing revenue over to B-Lab. It's just all it's doing is making sure that the standards are evolving and improving across every industry, and we can stop the competition of people judging what's right or wrong. But I mean, we're working with governments all the time, but when they want to work with tax incentives, that's upon them. That's upon local, policy organizations and them pushing it forward. We foreshadow it in the future, but right now we're just building the groundwork for companies to be able to, tout themselves as benefit corporations and why they do it, or certify as B corporations. So I mean, our assessment is completely free. Anybody can log into it. You can use it if you're a government, if you're a local organization. We've used some venture programs, incubator programs, investor groups. They've used the assessment completely free. And so the government of San Francisco, it's actually the Human Rights Commission that is using our assessment to make sure these benefit corporations are not just in their charter a benefit corporation, but they're actually creating impact in the local community. Because like he was saying, yes, they can be operating in San Francisco, but headquartered in Delaware, and maybe all of where they're incorporated, maybe that's where all their employee volunteerism is going. And so San Francisco is looking at making sure that that impact is being created locally, and they've been a strong partner in that regard. And then there's also academic organizations as well. So like Yale School of Management, NYU Stern's Business School, they both passed or agreed to offer to any student graduating from their graduate program who chooses to work for a certified B Corp, the university will agree to forgive up to 100% of their student loans. And this has been coming to us unsolicited. NYU, knocked on our door 2 months ago and said, we heard what Yale School of Management did. We would like to do the same. And so we've had a few students, and now we're getting a lot of applications and resumes from students coming from those universities wanting to work for these companies. But originally it was because they had that coming from their foundation dollars, but that was going towards students who choose to work for nonprofits. And what they were seeing was that a lot of these students were either going to Wall Street or they're going to the big tech, LinkedIn, Facebook, Salesforce in San Francisco, and not many of them were accepting jobs in nonprofits. So they saw B Corporation as being kind of a hybrid between the two, quality jobs, good companies, and still hitting these lists with the other Fortune 500s. So I mean, it's, academic, political, and nonprofits were, especially with the legislation and procurement, we had to work a lot with nonprofits to make sure we weren't impeding their space. So that's why there's that statute of making sure that a benefit corporation would never take place with a nonprofit if they already had that procurement in place. With the assessment, the way we built it was, yes, there are those different impact areas, the overall governance, environment, community, and workers. And then if you're a social business, like a Tom Shoes is kind of the poster child of buy one, give one. The way we built it is that if a company scores really, really well in environment, but is not doing much on community or in the governance, they won't hit that 80 points. It's balanced in a way that you need to have a very balanced impact across all those different areas. Yes, you have to hit 80 points, but there are different areas that a company really needs to make sure that they're creating that impact, all across the board. The way the assessment's built is that it's only on positive impact. And so think of like a standards test for students. If they skip a question, they're not going to be negatively scored. They're just given points or a grade on what they are answering to. And so a company goes through the same thing. If you don't answer a question or it doesn't apply to your company, you're not going to get negatively affected by that. We all know that a company of 2 people is not really looking at building an audit committee, or they're not going to start a board of directors. And so those questions, they won't be weighted. And so the weightings will differ according to the business's industry, their size, and their location. Obviously like Cascade Engineering with 2,000 employees doing manufacturing is not going to have the same questions as a sole proprietor doing sustainability consulting. And so when you're going through the assessment, you can see what's not weighted. So that means there's no points behind that question. Less weighted, equally weighted, heavily weighted. And again, those benchmarks can change. And then when a company gets their score, they can see how it measures against other companies in different industries, different sizes. And so again, like if there's anything that we could solicit, it's our assessment. It's a free tool. We've invested millions into it. We'll always keep it free. And that's our biggest kind of gift out to anybody as an entrepreneur is go through the assessment, see how the questions are. If you're building a business model, even if you just dreamt of a business and hopped on a plane and said, I'm going to start this business tomorrow. Not saying that's what I'm going to do. But if someone did that, it's a great tool for them to start posing questions and not have to go out and hire a sustainability consultant. I mean, there's a need, and there's a lot of sustainability consultants in the community, but this assessment's a huge resource for them. I want to be upfront. I didn't talk enough about certification. So the fee, and again, there's no fee with a company becoming a benefit corporation other than the typical filing fees with the Secretary of State's office. For certification, it's tiered by annual net sales of your previous year. So if you're a company between 0 and 2 million in revenue, it's $500 a year. 2 to 5 is 1,000, 5 to 10 is 2,500, and then it tiers up to companies that are 100 million plus. They're paying 25,000, and we'll cap it off at that. The fees are pretty low if you think of other certifications that are out there. A gentleman came up earlier and asked, what's our budget? Where's our funding coming from? About 80% of our funding is coming from foundations such as USAID, Rockefeller, Prudential, Deloitte, and a lot of that's for the investing side and as well as the public policy. And so we've been very fortunate with that, also because our founders were successful in one business, and so a lot of that went into that. So obviously we want the certification fees to be more of a sustainable revenue source, so we can be more sustainable as a nonprofit. But for now, most of it's coming from foundation. Yeah. And one more thing on that note, there's a lot of service offers. And so we have about 70 service offers for these companies to save money. Whether it's like free QuickBooks for companies under 3 million. It used to be 80% off from Salesforce, the Yale School of Management, things like that. We're really building these service offers to make sure that people can have a better time talking about this being a business case rather than just something like feel good.
Okay, so with that, we're right up against our time mark here. I want to thank each of our panelists. I want to thank Andy, Adam, and Bill for just being so wonderful. It was a nice chemistry, and I felt like it was a really very productive afternoon. Just a real quick thank you again to our corporate sponsors. It means a lot for both Ethics Point and Merchants to be here, Merchants specifically, to have both their CEO and Vice President here. I want to thank Net Impact again, all of our students and faculty, and all of you from all of our sectors, our leaders in our community. I'm already thinking about potential topics for 2014. I want to also tell you that this whole event was taped, and so one of the first things we're going to do is clean it up and then post it on our CLE website. And because your flyers went like hotcakes, Andy and I are going to work together, and I'll get a PDF copy and also load it to the CLE website. But that information is also part of the B Lab website, so we'll get you that information as well. And you know, for all of you, you're all good friends. We're going to see you here very shortly. The Center for Leadership Ethics has its next big program coming up in October, our 10th annual Collegiate Ethics Case Competition. Many of you are very familiar as judges, so for many of you, I'll see you very soon. So with that, I wish you the very best. Have a wonderful afternoon, and if you'd like to come talk to our panelists for a few, you're free to do so. Thanks again.